we look at Christ's message and teachings, and there's two really important parts. We see the miracles, and then we see the parables. And it's important that we take time to look, and to look down deep. We've examined these miracles and said, well, what do they really truly mean? What do they tell us about who Christ is? Well, today we're going to spend time looking at two parables. They're very short, and they're very strange. They're going to present a whole host of problems, but when we get down to it and look at what they really are, what the real true meaning is, we find there's something so meaningful to what we struggle with today in modern times. So if you'll join me, we're going to the Gospel of Matthew today. We're going to go to chapter 13, and we're going to look at the parable of the treasure and the parable of the merchant. And this is verses 44 through 46. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that somebody hid in a field, which someone else found and covered up. Full of joy, the finder sold everything and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. When he found one very precious pearl, he went and sold all that he owned and bought." It's kind of short, quick, and to the point. We have just a few little verses, but we have a big problem presented by two parables. So I'd like to start today by asking you, how many times in your life have you had that big important question, was it worth it? You know, I don't know about you, but that's a question I face a lot. Is it worth doing this or doing that? For example, how many of us have needed a new car? So we either balance whether we want to buy a brand new car or a new-to-me car, something a little older, that's maybe have a little bit of love on it. Well, how many times have we gone out and bought that brand new car, brand new off the lot? We drive it off, we're so happy, we're grinning from ear to ear, this is wonderful, we paid too much, but it's a nice car. It has all the bells and whistles. And then we go a week after we bought it from the dealer, and guess what? It won't start. Was it worth it? Most of us at that point are like, no, it's not worth it. But for some, it's like, okay, it's a new car, there's going to be some kinks, there's going to be some problems, but I'd rather have the new car because I'm going to take it to the dealership. And they're going to fix it. But is it worth all that headache? You probably experienced this question very young in your life, when you were hitting that dating game age, and you found that particular boy or girl you really liked. You had to ask yourself a question when you met them: are they worth the effort? Because think about it, we have to prim and prep and get all nice so that we can go out on a date. And then we have to spend all this money so that we can go out on a date just to learn a little bit about who they are. And then we've got to worry about how they see us. We have to ask ourselves a question: are they worth it? I'm going to answer the question for my wife. Yes. She was worth it. See, I said she was worth it, not I was worth it. She was worth it. How many times are we faced with such a dilemma? How many times do we have to ask ourselves if something is worth it? For me, it's a weekly event. When I look at the grass, and I sit there and I have to really think for a second, do I really want to get out there and spend an hour and a half to 2 hours trying to just mow the grass? Is the grass really worth it? Is it worth trimming all those shrubs? Or is it worth it to just go around with Roundup and kill everything? Or as a matter of fact, as far as the grass goes, is it worth just buying a bunch of concrete, painting it green? There we go. That looks good enough, doesn't it? Is that worth it? Of course, we find out that a lot of times our decisions aren't good ones. That things we think were worth it aren't. placed values in some of the strangest things. There's a sign in town at a business, and I'm not going to reveal which business this is, but it says closed on major holidays and Super Bowl Sunday. Is Super Bowl Sunday worth it? Is that worth being a major holiday? To them it is. You know, our values are interesting. When we ask ourselves, is it worth it? Most of the time we're not giving up anything. We're just looking at how we spend our money, the decisions we make. It's nothing that's going to be life-altering, life-changing. Maybe a job change occasionally can be. Is it worth changing your career or job? Early Christians faced this question. They faced it at a completely different level. See, here's the thing. For early Christians, they were oddballs. Remember, we talked about how they couldn't go to the local barbecue and eat the food sacrificed to the idol. So what did that mean for them? Well, it meant that if they were a business person, that they couldn't have any local deals and businesses because these local business people wouldn't want anything to do with them. Those are those oddball Christians. They won't come and eat with us. A lot of the folks during this time period that were in the world of business were in guilds, a group of businesses that banded together. That guild would kick them out because they wouldn't go to the local barbecue. They wouldn't interact. But it got worse. You said, hey, I'm gonna follow this Jesus guy. I like what he's saying, and I feel a call from God that I'm going to follow this new Christian church. And you know what your family did? They looked at you and said, you're crazy. And then this Sunday, when you go to worship with the Christians, and you don't go to the temple during the week, the local temple to Apollo, with the rest of your family, you know what? They say, you're turning your back on us. So what happens? You're ostracized. You're the black sheep of the family. I got to ask you, does this sound like it's worth being a Christian to these early first century folks? You see, the thing about the Gospel of Matthew is Matthew's addressing people who gave up everything for their faith. When you made that decision to join the church, when you made that decision and God placed it on your heart that you were going to be a Christian, what did you give up? For some of us, not much. But for these people in the Gospel of Matthew, they gave up everything. So I know the question on your mind is what does this have to do with these two parables? Well, let's take a look and let's see what it has to do. Remember, they're giving up everything. So in the parable of the treasure, here's what you've got to think about. You are an individual who walks out into a field. And as you're walking out into this field, you notice it's for sale. And it's a really nice field. It looks nice. You say, okay, I might build a house or have a farm. Who knows what. But I'm not really interested in it. But as you're walking, you stumble across something. And you look down and you find the greatest treasure you could ever find. So what do? Well, Jesus tells us, you quickly go and you run and you buy the property. Now, hang on a minute, Jesus. There's a problem, isn't there? Let's talk about ethics for a second. Is it right for you to go and buy this piece of property from the owner and you're not going to tell the owner, hey, there's a bunch of oil down there, or there's this buried treasure down there? But does Jesus say anything about the ethics here? This is one of those problems that's puzzled philosophers and theologians for centuries. Jesus, what are you talking about? What about, hold on a second, shouldn't you go and tell the owner? That's what Christians are supposed to do. But you know, they missed the point of the story. Let's take a look at the very first part. It says the kingdom of heaven. We have to understand that little phrase right there is so important. The kingdom of heaven. Is it worth quickly giving up everything you've got and running and buying this piece of property so that you can get the kingdom of heaven? Is it worth it? Absolutely. That's what Christ tells us. It's absolutely worth. By all means necessary, the kingdom of heaven is worth it. And Jesus isn't done. He says, let's go and let's take a look at this merchant. So you're a merchant, and you deal in fine pearls. And you come across the most beautiful pearl in all of the world. So you sell everything you got. Everything you've got. You sell everything so that you can get this one pearl. Now, I know I got some business folks in here today. That's not the model of business, is it? To give everything up. We got another ethical decision here. We're like, Jesus, hold on a minute. We got to give up everything? Everything for one? So we're supposed to fixate on one object? See, again, theologians, philosophers, they've argued this point. But what have they missed? The same thing. Look at the start. Again, says Jesus in verse 45, the kingdom of heaven. Is it worth giving up everything you've got for the kingdom of heaven? Absolutely. Is there anything else that we can fixate on? No. We can fixate and fix our eyes upon the kingdom of heaven, and everything else falls into place. So I've got to ask, when we're looking at such a story, how does it impact us today when we're looking at our decisions on what we do, on how we make our decision making? You know, there was a man many years ago who faced a dilemma. He was a great teacher. But what he taught, some people didn't want to hear. And there were those who really just were intensely critical of everything that he taught. And one day, God kind of just places on this individual's heart that he's going to have to sacrifice and die for his faith. Is it worth it? We don't get faced with that decision. But I would hope that if we did, we would say, God, use me. You know, when we look at this man went to the cross and died for us. And I got to think, when Jesus is on that cross, having been beaten, crucified, spat on, humiliated, nailed, I wonder if Jesus wondered, are they worth it? I know that that's not on Jesus' mind. I know Jesus knows that we are worth it. That we are worth dying for. But do we live up to that expectation? Are we someone worth dying for? I've got to sit back and think of just the atrocity, the violence of the death. And we're worth all that. We're worth the pain and suffering, the most horrific death you can think of, and we are worth that. Then why don't we live it? We have a big thing in Christian ethics. I know that sounds like a joke when we look at trying to make ethical decisions via Christianity, because people just don't do that. We don't do that. We're going to make our decisions by what makes us money, what gives us power, what makes our lives easier. We're not going to do the Christian thing. We're going to do the easy thing, because the Christian way is too hard. But in the Christian ethics world, we find that the principles of Christ reign supreme. And that love and justice are the principles that Christ talks about. And that is not an easy road. We got to love everyone. We have to seek justice for everyone. Oh, come on, Jesus. That's too hard. That's too hard. A couple years ago, there was a country song. And I don't listen to a ton of country music, but this was catchy. The artist was Toby Keith, who I know has had all sorts of run-ins with the media and stuff. But he had a song that goes, let's see, I want to talk about me. I like talking about you, usually. But occasionally, I want to talk about me. Me. Toby Keith's wrong. We talk about ourselves way too much. We talk about what we want and what we desire. You know, it's all about image in modern America. One of the things that bothers me is during political seasons, so next year, 2016, it's amazing how many politicians find God in 2016. All of them, I would bet all of them will find God in 2016. And I wouldn't be surprised to see more than a few come in, sit down, and worship with us. And they've got a prayer request. They're going to thank God for our community and for our troops. Every single time. Which I want to just praise God for our community and for our troops. Do you mean it? Do you really mean it? Or are you just saying it because you want something? How many times do we want something from our faith? There are tons of people who come to church because it looks good. People in the community think I'm a good person because I go to church. Or it looks good on my resume. It's going to help me out when I go to get a job. Or when I go to college. Or maybe I like going to church because everybody will think I'm important. Because I want to run this and run that. Because I am important. I got to ask, is that worth it? Is it truly worth it? I go back to that cross. For me, Christianity is about the cross. And whether or not it sounds morbid, I can't help it. The sacrifice of Christ on that cross, and then the immediate reversal of death as Jesus resurrects and later ascends. If we are worth dying for, then we have to find a way to give up all of our inward focus and narcissism. We have to learn to live like Christ. Christ gave His life for all of us. It's time for us to learn that when we come to Christ, it is worth the sacrifice, that we do have to give up. We look in the gospel and we see that the words, change your hearts and minds, is written so many times I've lost count. It is worth it to change your life, to change your heart, to change your mind, to come to Christ and to take all of your preconceived notions and narcissism, to throw those away. It is worth it to be someone worthy of dying. Amen?